Howdy and welcome to episode 18 of the 240SX2JZ swap. There's a ton to do on the 240 before it's ready to be started for the first time, so let's get going on it. This car hasn't seen daylight for like a year. It's pretty cool to have it out of the barn. So to get the party started here, I'm hooking up the wiring harness, making sure all those connectors get to their various sensors on the engine and making it as tidy as I possibly can. Alright, so here's what we've gotten done today. We got our wiring harness all kind of figured out. We have it routed behind the cylinder head here, and then it just goes right behind the intake, and it runs under this part of the intake manifold. So it goes to the NOx sensors, the injectors, the VVT, and it kind of loops around over top here and goes to the alternator and the boost control solenoid, which I have mounted right below the turbo here, right on this little rail in the engine bay. It's right there, so that's pretty nice. The wires have enough slack in them. They're wired to they're attached to the sway bar down there, so that is looking pretty good. I've also went ahead, stepping on zip ties. So I've also figured out our heating hoses here. So this one coming off the back of the cylinder head goes to a 90 degree. You can't really see it, but it's behind this bundle of wires. It goes to a 90 degree, to a coupler, to another 90 degree. And then I did the same thing for this bottom port here, going to the what would that be called? The water bypass pipe, I believe it's called. So that runs behind the cylinder head. So that also, it goes 90 degree to another 90 degree with a coupler. Same exact thing as this one, except I've wrapped some DEI heat sleeve stuff. It's Velcro, it repels heat, I think, pretty well, because it's right next to the downpipe. So we have to make sure that we keep that thing nice and cool so it doesn't catch on fire. I was going to attach our intake manifold, but our gasket that I got does not fit. It looks kind of like it does, but the holes don't line up. So it is rather unfortunate. We're gonna have to order another one of those. And then here is our fuel pressure regulator that I have just went ahead and mounted by bending the bracket that came with it 90 degrees, and then drilled into this little lip coming off the firewall. Got that thing nice and mounted up. It's very sturdy. And then I went ahead and did my fittings. This is very awkward. I need to change this up. This is the line going to the fuel rail, and it loops around the brake booster, and it does not look clean. So I'm gonna have a 90 degree fitting to make sure that this just goes straight down. So that should be cleaning that bit of the engine up a little bit. What's going on, gamers? Just got done wiring up the transmission harness and doing a quick test here to make sure that it works. Here's the shift stick, and I can't get it over into reverse, but as soon as you turn on switched power, you can get it over and up into reverse. And then if you head to the back of the car here, you can see that our reverse lights do indeed end up working. So that's really cool that we got that all wired up. Just another checkbox out of the way, and we're gonna keep rolling with this project. So the next thing that I'm gonna tackle is getting this fender off, because the wiring harness that runs under this wheel well runs along the bottom here, I guess you could say. It runs along where if the tire came up too high, it would hit the wiring harness. So we're gonna do what's called a wire tuck and basically transfer that wire harness to the side under this fender, so that when we lower the car in the future, the tires are not going to rub through that harness and then cause us some problems down the road. So this isn't really necessary to start the engine, but it's something that it's gonna have to happen anyway, and I have some wires to run to the front of the car regardless, so it's something that we should probably just do now to get it out of the way. So I'm gonna remove this fender, and then I will get to tucking that wiring harness. And all I'm doing here is mocking up the harness onto the fender wall just so I can figure out where I need to notch the fender wall, because there's a little lip that needs to be notched, which you'll see in this next clip here. So here's the fender harness all tucked up where it needs to go, but you'll see a little bit later in the video that this did not work at all for me, and it turned into a week-long project to fix this, so just stay tuned for that. And here I am CNCing some oil cooler brackets that I designed. And I made it so that you can install them using the existing bolts for the front brace on the car. So here I am just torquing those down, one on each side. Using some stainless steel hardware here for the oil cooler itself. Right on, so here is the oil cooler. There are some brackets here that an old coworker of mine named Steve helped me CNC because he's got an awesome workshop. So we got those all made up, and this thing is, it is on there. So I'm really, really excited about that. It looks really sleek. Looks very stealthy, and you won't be able to see it behind the intercooler. So the intercooler, will sit out front here. You've got your oil cooler, and then our radiator is gonna sit obviously right in there. So everything is coming together, and then next up on the list is to cut our oil cooler lines to length. So I'm going to get that all figured out right now and see what, you know. And unfortunately, I went to mock up the fenders just to make sure everything fit, and they didn't. This actually bulges out so far off of the lip that it pushes the fenders out, and it doesn't line up. The gaps look terrible when it was all, when the bolts were all screwed down and everything like that. It was not working out. And I do not want to relocate my fuse boxes, because I know a lot of people do that, to under the dash, and I don't have the time, or I just don't want to do that right now. So my solution is that I'm going to splice the harness about right here, and I'm going to take the wires and I'm going to feed them through this little cavity in the side here, and this is all kind of hollow, so I'm going to fish the wires up through here, and then there is a little, just a really small little outlet right up in here. It's very hard to see, but anyway, there's a little hole right here that connects the hollow part of this piece of metal to come inside the engine bay here. So I'm gonna basically route these wires through here and into the engine bay, and then I'm gonna splice them back together so that this whole section right here is going to be, there's not gonna be any wires. Actually, well, there will be the cable for the hood latch, but that's it. So we're gonna do that to this side, and then I was having the same problem on the other side, so we're going to do the exact same process, and I will let you know how it all goes. So that's currently where we are at. right, so here's where we're at. I've got 10 wires coming through up inside this cutout right here. As you can see, they go up through. We got 10 wires here, 10 wires down here, all marked. The problem is that with the way the wire is, the harness is stretched, the wires just don't reach. It's like they butt up against each other, but they're just too short. So what I'm gonna have to do is solder a little piece of wire to this to extend them just a little bit, and then solder them to these guys. So as you can see, I've already done 10 wires, and we've got about 100 more to go. I'm really excited about that. So
There's this cheesy bread also.
I'll have some cheesy bread. Thanks. So we're about an hour and a half in. I've soldered 7 wires so far out of the 100 that are there, and I'm about ready to we're in the home stretch. Not much wires left there. This is a rat's nest that I'm gonna have to deal with. I ran out of solder. Went through 2 bottles. But we're almost done. So I'm just gonna finish these up. I think there's like 24 wires. A couple more that I need to route through, and then we're done one side. So it's always something with this project, and in this case, it's the throttle cable. So this is a brand new throttle cable that is much shorter than the OEM throttle cable, and you can use the original throttle cable from the S13, but it's just way too long for what you really need with this swap. So what happens is if you use the original throttle cable, people usually tend to loop it under the intake manifold here, and it still works. It's just the pedal feel isn't that great because you've got all these loops and kind of kinks that you're trying to work the cable through. So a lot of people get a shorter throttle cable. This one is from a Camry. I think it's a 2001 Camry, if I'm correct. And the length is just about perfect. Here's the throttle body right here where the throttle cable needs to go. However, this part of the throttle cable, the cable itself, is far too short. So I'm pulling, there's no more slack. This is as far as the cable can go. And when you put it around the TPS lever sensor assembly, where the torsion spring is, after this loops all around, there's just not enough length, and the end of your throttle cable is sitting like right there. And it just doesn't work. The bracket doesn't extend that far. So I'm gonna have to remove this one. I ordered another throttle cable that is just about the same length and hopefully a little bit longer in terms of where the cable is. So if I get a throttle cable that works, I'll throw that part number in the description of this video, but you know, it's always gonna be something. So here's our new throttle cable. I've cut it up a little bit just so it fits onto this bracket. So the holes are not aligned from this throttle cable to the bracket that comes on the S13. So I had to notch out, I'll show you here. I notched out the sides of the holes here so that it kind of gets seated in between these 2 studs that stick up from the bracket. It kind of sits centered between the 2 there, and then it gets pressed against the firewall. So it really just has to be relatively centered on there, and then it gets smushed against the firewall anyway. So you really don't need too much alignment on this thing, and you certainly don't, if it can't go over these studs like the original throttle cable, I think we'll be all right. So I'm gonna go install this in the car, and hopefully this new throttle cable works. All right, we're good to go on the throttle cable. It's installed. It is the correct length for our CX Racing bracket. And when you push the pedal all the way down, it opens the butterfly valve and the throttle body 100%. So we've got that all figured out. Now on to the next thing. So I'm trying to install this fuel pulse damper onto the fuel rail, and it would be going right, it's hard to see, right in this little area right here. Unfortunately, I thought there was going to be enough room to just thread it in there and we'd be good to go, but there's not. So I have to take off the fuel rail to install our fuel pulse damper, and to do that I have to remove everything over here, so our intake manifold and stuff. So I'm going to get to doing that now because of course we just don't have enough room to do the easy installation, so we've got to take the fuel rail off to pop that puppy in. Cool little Chase Bay's coolant overflow tank. The plan currently is to have this puppy sitting right here behind the radiator. It's pretty low. It's not ideal, but the only other option was to have it kind of mounted up here. And I would have had to fab up this mount. I'm sorry, I wouldn't have done the fabbing. I would have taken it to a weld shop to get fixed or modified. But basically, it fits pretty nice down here on this little shoulder where the battery tray used to go. So I like where it's at. I'm gonna mark it up and then we'll get this thing mounted. Nice. Just like that. A nice little, nice. That looks really nice. I'll mount it up. Looking pretty good. Very cool. Very nice. Now I'm going to wrap up the video here. There is still a lot more to do before we actually drive the car for the first time, but in terms of starting it up, we're pretty much there. So the next video that comes out is going to be actually getting the intercooler and intercooler piping all situated and installed, because I'm taking the car to a fab shop to get all of that done, and then hopefully after that we crank it for the first time. So that'll be a really exciting video, and I can't wait to put it up for you guys. So hopefully this bad boy starts right up. But until then, I will catch you in the next one, and thanks so much for sticking around.